So for those of you who haven't seen the previous rant video, basically this is going to be a series of videos where I just talk, about a specific topic that interests me, that's related to stories and current goings on in the universe, and it's going to just be me kind of ranting. As I changed the name of this channel to Raven's Rants, I figured I should probably rant a little more instead of just being so scripted. Besides, if I ever do want to do like a podcast, which I might do, I enjoy podcasts. I don't know if I ever will make one myself. I would probably need a co-host, but point is, if I ever want to do that, I should probably get used to just talking, not just reading off a script. What I wanted to talk about today specifically is the concept of storytelling and free speech, but by looking at it through the lens of South Park. For those of you who have been living under a rock, South Park is a comedy TV series. I think it was on Adult Swim and it's currently on Comedy Central or something like that. I'm not sure. I'm not American. And I've had to watch it through streaming services mostly nowadays, but I used to watch it on whatever channel it came up on here in South Africa. Point is, I've always enjoyed South Park. I love South Park and their style of humor, the way they parody things, the way they're not afraid to make fun of literally everyone. I still fondly remember when they had a 2 or 3 episode special on atheism. At the time, I had newly considered myself an atheist after a long time of thinking on the topic, reading up on things, reading books by Richard Dawkins, etc. I had made peace with the fact that, okay, yes, I am an atheist, this is what I believe, etc. Then the episode came out, I'm like, oh, awesome, they're talking about atheists, that's good, and they completely just dunked on atheism and people who followed it, and I'm like, great, I'm all for that. They dunked on atheism, they dunked on Richard Dawkins, and on a lot of different things in those episodes, but I still enjoyed it. They were really funny. And I could probably watch it now and still laugh. And that's the thing. South Park has never been afraid to poke fun at anything. Now, it's been a while since I've watched South Park, but the recent story has been that apparently they made an episode kind of parodying Prince Harry and Meghan, and made fun of them wanting privacy but going on a world tour and things like that. I find that funny. It's hilarious. But apparently the royal couple was considering to sue South Park, and that clearly shows the UK bias, because I'm pretty sure in America it's very difficult to sue for libel and things like that, whereas in the UK it's easier or something like that. Point is, when you get made fun of, do you honestly think that the way to make it stop is by telling the people stop doing that? Or do you think that maybe leaning into the humor would make people see that, oh, okay, they're a good sport about it, they can enjoy it, they can laugh along, and then they would leave you alone? The internet mob would leave you alone. But of course, it's that specific royal couple and they've got a very thin skin, so I'm not even going to go down that route. But that's what basically, sparked this idea for a video for me. I realized that, I've always enjoyed South Park. I've always enjoyed their humor. And I enjoy their storytelling and how they do it through a free speech lens. Basically, the way I see it, right, is South Park could have been a show where they play it safe. They don't do anything edgy. They don't do anything that could piss people off. They don't do anything that could rattle the cage, so to speak. They could still do that and have a very long career and have a very long runtime, make good stories, etc. But South Park became this cultural phenomenon because they weren't afraid to poke fun at everyone. They weren't afraid to call on everyone's bullshit. There's immense value in mocking sacred cows. If there's anything in society that we hold as, oh, you shouldn't mock that, you shouldn't make fun of that, you shouldn't make light of this subject, South Park looks at that and says, that is what we're attacking. That is what we're going to poke fun at. And there's value in that. Anything that we hold up as sacred should be poked at, should be prodded. If it can hold up to scrutiny, if it can hold up to relentless mocking, then there's not a problem. But if it crumbles under the slightest scrutiny, under the slightest hint of mockery, then why is it sacred? So I do find immense value in mocking these things that we as a society hold as sacrosanct. But South Park accomplishes all of this because of free speech. South Park accomplishes all of this because they have the freedom to make fun of people, ideas, events, etc. You cannot tell a story if free speech is not free. Now, maybe South Park does take this to a little bit of an extreme. They do kind of, go all out with the free speech and just, make fun. And there's value in that. They are comedians. The creators of South Park are essentially comedians who deliver their comedy through an animated story. And comedians are the jesters of our time, and they're supposed to point out the incongruencies in modern culture. That's what the jester is supposed to do. They're supposed to poke fun at a sore spot where most people kind of want to look away, but by poking at that sore spot, it kind of brings attention to it and allows people to, in some way, make peace with it. So like I said, immense value in doing that. But they only do this because they have free speech. They have the freedom to say these things. They have the freedom to write about these things and make a story on it. But stories cannot be told if speech is not free. By limiting free speech, by saying that there are certain things you cannot talk about, you are essentially stifling the creative spirit. This is a bit of a tangent, but bear with me. I know a lot of you are Brandon Sanderson fans, so you might enjoy this. On one episode of Writing Excuses, now I haven't listened to this episode in a long time, but I remember it vividly. A question was asked, and I think the question was something along the lines of, can a writer write about something or someone that they're not a background of? I think it was around like if a writer who is, for example, white could write a story about a black person in, let's say, modern America, or if a person with perfectly working legs could write about someone who's in a wheelchair, etc. You know, can a writer write about the other? I think maybe even the episode was named like Writing the Other or something like that. Point is, Brandon Sanderson answered, yes, he thinks you can. He thinks you should take a lot of care in making sure you get it right, ask a lot of questions, educate yourself, and try and portray it as accurately as you can without trying to completely mock the people who suffer under these conditions or who are the other. The idea is to try and see the world through their lens instead of trying to just parody them, which I find completely respectable. I would say you can mock, but I understand where he's coming from, and I wouldn't necessarily write a story about, let's say, a disabled person just to mock that. That to me is cruel and completely unnecessary. But the point is, I 100% agree with what Brandon said. Then Mary Robinette Kowal on the podcast said that no, you shouldn't. You shouldn't be able to write about anything. Brandon said you should be able to, but doesn't mean obviously you will. And I think Mary said something along the lines of, you can, but you shouldn't. And that's something I have a disagreement with. And not to throw shade, because I haven't read any of Mary's books, that's probably why Brandon Sanderson is a better known author than anyone else on that podcast. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that you cannot have stories, well-told stories, without free speech. The moment you start saying that this specific topic cannot be talked about, or this specific topic cannot even be broached, that is when you start killing the creative spirit. How many great, fantastical, imaginative works came out of, I don't know, the Soviet Union or North Korea, or even now currently in communist China? Where you have totalitarian governments limiting free speech, you will have a death of creativity. So if you value stories, you should value free speech. But if you value stories, but still think that certain opinions should be censored, or people should be cancelled for holding certain opinions, or anything like that, then you are a hypocrite. How can you enjoy the product of free speech whilst wanting to limit free speech? Now, some of you might say, oh, but there's a difference between free speech and hate speech, etc., etc. I honestly, and this might come as a shock to some of you, because I'm going to be completely raw and honest here, I don't even ascribe to something like hate speech, because hate speech is so nebulous. It's like, oh, they said something and they were hateful about it. They said something about someone and it came from a place of hate. My first question is, how do you know? If they said, oh, I hate you because you're a insert slur here, okay, then I understand. And they should rightfully be socially ostracized from society, anyone like that. There's nothing wrong with ostracizing and not agreeing with certain people for their opinions. But does that mean we tell them they can't say it? Does that mean we tell them that if they say it, they will go to jail, or that they will face legal penalties in some way? No. There's a difference between hate speech and speech that you hate. And when it comes to hate speech, who decides? Who decides that it's hate speech? Who decides that, oh, this one was hate speech, but this one was speech that you hate? I'm reminded of the Salem witch trials. And if I recall correctly, there was obviously accusations of witchery thrown around at a lot of people in the community. But when it started touching on important officials or relations to important officials like the sheriff or the judge or things like that, it would get thrown out like, oh no, they must be wrong about that. Oh, but you're saying that this person is a witch? Oh, okay, that's true. Oh, but this other person, that's a relative of the constable or something? Oh no, you must be wrong about that. So it's like, who decides? It's completely arbitrary. So if you don't value free speech, all you're doing is creating a power vacuum somewhere in the chain of command of society where someone is going to have the power to enforce that censorship. If at any point you say that certain speech is not okay, you're creating a hole that someone can fill where they can actively go about trying to censor that speech by actively going out and saying that thing cannot be said. You're creating commissars of censorship the moment you say that certain things can't be talked about. And if there's one thing you need to learn about power, is that the moment someone has a little bit of power, they will want more. Some people can be fine. A lot of people don't necessarily want that kind of power, but there are those in society who does. You only need one. You only need one person who wants power enough that they're willing to climb the ladder into that role and start enforcing their power to get to a totalitarian society. So the moment you say these things can't be joked about, these things can't be talked about, someone is going to find that position, they're going to fill it, and they're going to find a way to increase the scope of what they can say is fine to talk about and what isn't. They will find a way to kind of expand their realm of power. This is borne true throughout all of human history. Where you create a hierarchical structure, people will try to climb it. If you have no checks and balances in place to make sure that the people who climb it are the people you want in charge, psychopaths and sociopaths will climb that ladder and they will fill those roles. So you need to find a way to protect people from those kind of people, and by valuing free speech, you at the very least make sure that anyone who does act like that can be mocked and ridiculed and pointed out. Because yeah, that's another side effect. If someone like that does get into power, suddenly you can't make fun of them. Suddenly you can't mock them or point them out. So counteracting them when they're already in that seat of power becomes nearly impossible. So you have to stop it ahead of time, which means you need to value free speech. Anyway, I mean, I could bang on this drum forever, and I don't think the free speech question will ever be completely answered as long as we have moral busybodies who think that certain topics are taboo, or who thinks that if you hold certain opinions that speaks to your moral character. I don't think that's ever going to go away. What we need to do is try to at the very least have a societal attitude that free speech is necessary. It is absolutely necessary. Number one, if we don't want to kill the creative spirit of artists, writers, etc. And number two, if we want to preserve freedom for as many people as possible for as long as possible. Eventually, hopefully, we'll get to a point where people who do want to stifle free speech don't have that choice. I'm looking forward to potentially a blockchain related or blockchain built internet where censorship is literally impossible. I'm not exactly sure if that's 100% what we want, but it's in the right direction. We as a society will have to find something that works. But the point I'm trying to make is we need to start speaking out against the people who would stifle free speech. It doesn't mean you have to agree with the opinions of people who say horrid stuff. It doesn't mean you have to even defend people who say horrid stuff. But what it does mean is that you defend the right of them to say those horrid things. And that brings us back to South Park. South Park would not exist today if they wanted to try and get off the ground today. Imagine if South Park didn't exist and Matt and Trey Parker, the creator, only met 5 years ago, and now they're going to try and launch this thing they call South Park in today's climate, on today's internet. It would not work. The only reason South Park is still around is because they were around earlier and they have enough momentum to where they are uncancelable at this point. But that's the problem. Eventually, South Park will have to end. Everything comes to an end. Maybe one day Matt and Trey Parker decide to retire. And even if the show goes under different showrunners or something like that, we all know that at some point either something gracefully ends or it dies a slow death, becoming less and less like its former self, becoming completely watered down and a version of itself that the old fans don't enjoy, etc. So either it's going to die a graceful death or it's going to die a slow death, but eventually everything does die out, South Park included. So if we want someone to be able to create a successor to South Park one day, when South Park eventually ends, if we want something similar, how can we get that if we actively censor free speech in society? We can't. So we need to do whatever we can to preserve free speech, not just for the sake of these shows or these potential shows, but also just for the sake of the everyday person who wants to feel comfortable expressing their own opinions. Now, I could go on about the different arguments against free speech, and I could try and debunk them, but this is very much a matter of opinion. You could tell me that, oh, certain words or certain phrases is actual violence against those people. I don't agree. Our worldviews are fundamentally different. I, on a fundamental level, don't think that that is violence against those people. You, the hypothetical person who does think that, on a fundamental level think it is violence against those people. So there's no reconciling here. One of us would have to give up essentially our fundamental and base viewpoint on the whole matter. One of us would have to completely concede to the other side to be able to come to some kind of understanding. Neither side will be happy with a half measure. So I'm not going to debate or try and debunk certain arguments against this. These are just my opinions. And my opinion is we should value free speech. And South Park kind of exemplifies why. At least from a creative storytelling perspective, South Park exemplifies why we should, at the very least, value free speech. And if you value free speech, make it known. Speak out. Don't tolerate censorship. And watch some South Park. It's good for you.